Hello, and a very, very warm welcome to our first webinar ever. So, hello, my name is Ricardo. Today, I will present you about the 6 new realities in the IP sector, as I call it, and therefore I'm looking very forward to this. Yeah, I'm Ricardo. I'm the founder of EVOip, which is a small engineering company from Germany, where we work mainly to support IP departments and law firms and working with IP professionals. So what you have to know about me is I'm quite recent in the IP sector, like 7 years now. And I started really from scratch. I had one lecture about IP in my studies, and that was everything that I know about IP. What was now the difference, or made a difference, how I could even prevail 7 years with my own company in this sector, was that I was very communicative. I was going to the experts, I was meeting people, and I asked them, and they told me a lot of stories. And the summary of all these stories that you find now in this webinar, where it says, okay, that are the 6 new realities in the IP sector. I like you to think about them and to reflect for you. There's something very important before we start, and it is that what I called the I already know trap. And this goes especially for adult or professional education, because I barely met anyone in IP which were not clever. So I believe there's everything that I have said and will say now in future, you already somehow have known or is somehow obvious to you. I understand this, that's okay, but be careful, it can be a trap, because for that example, as a German, I like to go with the metaphor of soccer. You know, if the World Championship series is coming, 80 million Germans are now knowing more about soccer than the World Championship players and the trainer. And this is, everyone knows how to play soccer. That's not the point. They know. The question is, are they all world-class soccer players? No. Why? What is the difference? And therefore, if you ask a world-class soccer player, hey, what is your secret? How can I become a world-class soccer player? He says, okay, first of all, you know already the game, that's not the point, but you have to do repetition, rehearsal, and adaption. You have to train again and again, which means even if there's something that you have already heard, that's like training for your game. And that helps you to step up in your IP game. Therefore, please forgive me if there's something that seems too obvious for you, but perhaps if you get one idea that helps you to improve your IP game, then you made my day. So thank you. Now, we have 2 very important external factors that was influencing the world, not only IP, the world. One was COVID-19, everyone have heard of it. And what is very important for you to understand is COVID-19 has changed the world forever, which means we are different persons than we were pre the pandemic. And therefore we have a pre-pandemic time and we have a post-pandemic time. What we have learned is that what we have learned is just the way how we do business today is totally different as it was before COVID. And people nowadays, they seek, for example, to work more from home. It's okay to have business meetings online. You know, it's much more accepted as it were already before. And even the common sense is now to go digital first before you spend time traveling. And therefore, this is a huge change that you have in our society, which is important to consider as a clever IP manager. The second thing is, and now I lose any opportunity to visit Russia in the near time, is the war between Russia and Ukraine. And especially one action was that Russia said, hey, it's okay to steal patents from anyone in unfriendly countries. And this was also the Ukraine conflict. It's not the Ukraine conflict, it's the Ukraine war or conflict, will make a heavy dent in our economy. That's for sure. A couple of budgets which will be cut. One of them will be for sure your IP budget, where people talk, okay, is this really necessary? And the second thing, they said like, hey, in Russia, they waived our patents. Why shall invest in that? And you as an IP manager need to have the answer for this. So please prepare yourself. At some point, I think in the next couple of months, people will ask you something like this, hey, does the patent system has a future? Is it still make it still sense to go for IP rights? And yes, it always makes sense to go for IP rights. That's not the point. The question is, does it support your strategy? That's the difference. And there are much other better speakers than myself who can refer to this. That are the two external factors that really changed a lot in the recent years. There's this saying that history repeats itself. For me, I was very surprised that the 20th century is like repeating in the last 2 years. So hopefully we come soon to the area of peace and where everything was nice again, and the 90s start happening. Jack Welch is one of my mentors. I never met him, but still he inspired me a lot. Is with this quote where he says like, hey, face reality as it is, not as it was or you wish it to be, which means it will never be pre-pandemic. And also hoping that everything goes back to the normal state, and so will also not happening. So we have to face the realities as they are. And now you're thinking like, okay, Ricardo, that's kind of obvious. What are the realities that you think for the IP sector? And now I will start with the... before I forgot, if you have questions or so, please ask them in the chat. We will answer them then in the dedicated Q&A session. So no AI related question will be forgotten, I promise. The first reality, and this is now very important because there's a background story for this. I have one customer, and that customer, I met him 2 years ago in a fair. And we had a good time. It was a really good talk, charming. And a couple of weeks ago, we had another conversation, and he said to me, hey, Ricardo, one thing that really stuck in with our first encounter was that you said the IP market is now a biomarket. And I was wondering, because for me, it was like thinking is quite obvious. And you have to know that guy, that person, he works for a large corporate, and he even mentors other IP managers. But still, and now I lose perhaps some law firm friends with this, the IP market is a buyer market, which means you as an IP manager, you are not anymore a client, you become a customer. And what is a client? A client is someone who seeks professional advice or receives services. And if you read the definition from Cambridge, it says a customer or someone who receives services. And a customer is a person who buys goods or services with a certain expectation. And therefore, what was happening before, like that you had a kind of few IP market, there were very few service providers. It was heavily restricted. It is not anymore. And therefore, you have to be careful about this. And especially if you look at the German market, you have to know since the last 20 years, the number of patent attorneys has doubled. So yes, also the demand is much, much higher. This is for sure. The difference is just now there are more companies available, law firms available you can work with. And also the other thing is that what I like to draw your attention to is, this is also something nice from the IP studies that I learned from the professor, but there was a quote that he said, and he says like, hey, intellectual property law is likely the most harmonized law area in the world. And I was like, wow. What means this for the IP market? Basically, you have this driver of globalization. There's now law firms which perhaps are in other jurisdictions you could access to, and they can provide you with somehow the same service, perhaps not in the same quality. Sure. Also, you cannot compare everything one-to-one, but still, if there's, we didn't talk about the unitary patent yet, but it could be possible that you could leverage on this, that you can have in a jurisdiction a better price or so. And therefore, this is something which is very important to consider. So in the conclusion, this means just two things. There are more IP service providers, law firms, and practitioners than there were ever before. And the topic, no, the intellectual property law, is somehow, and there's a strong motivation to harmonize, because there are a lot of jurisdictions, you're dealing with them, and therefore there's a certain driver for it, which will drive this into more harmonized. So for you as a now customer of such kind of services, it gives you the upper hand to receive services, because the IP services, including legal advice, tend to become a commodity. And therefore, we could do a different seminar for law firms, because they have now to step up the game and ensure that they can keep their premium prices. So that would be interesting. But I'll leave it to my law firm friends. So what are ideas what you can do? Is you are in control and you can act. That's very important. You have now the upper hand. There are more service providers and young law firms craving to work with you. I know this because I'm also a service provider. I'm also craving to work with people. That's not the point. And now you can pick the people you want to work with, treat you as their priority. And also the good thing is you should have a second option. And therefore, I call it the rule of two. This is something that I've observed with larger corporates. All corporates or so, larger corporates, they have this mandatory rule in the professional supplier management that they say, okay, we need to have 2 suppliers for each service. And that makes sense to have this. There's a nice article that I will put into the show notes, which is from the Harvard Business Review about supplier diversity, where you can see that this rule is very important. If you look at most of the medium-sized and small companies, they have like one law firm, and usually that law firm somehow is a friend from the former CEO, somehow like this. There's a strong connection and partnership, which is good, That's not the point. It's also good to have a second one, just because with this you can ensure if there's something with this law firm, you're somehow independent from them. And that's very important to keep your independence. And the next thing, I call it plant your next apple tree. Because you have your law firms, they are like strong, they're really, really strong trees. They give good value to you, sweet apples, and that's nice. But also, part of your budget, think of it spending it for young law firms, for young service providers, even with a small task or object you give to them. Because they will be always thankful for you. They see you as their priority. And as soon as they become also trees and can deliver nice apples to you, they make it perhaps in a way you prefer it. So it makes sense to have this. All this is not a secret. You can find books and material, tons of it, about supplier management. If I look in the IP departments, especially for this one-person departments or so, some of them, they have very few suppliers because they can't afford. They don't want to spend the time for supplier management, but still it's very important if you want to be in control and independent from your suppliers. The next reality is about digitalization. And you think, yeah, okay, digitalization, everything becomes digitized, necessary or not. Because the digitalization, it happens now and you cannot stop it. You as an IP manager, you have to act in a certain way, which is not, which means like, even if you want back your good old times, they will never come. Other people will drive you to it. And therefore, what I like from that definition from Gartner was the use of digital technologies change a business model and provide new revenue and value producing opportunities. It's the process of moving to a digital business. Okay, that is now a big thing. If you can, there's a nice study that I also put in the show notes from Telecom about digitalization and digitization of small, medium enterprises in Germany. And they found something very interesting in the post-pandemic time. The digital leaders, they outperform their competitors strongly. Also, people, they were forced to put them into home office, and everyone was expecting like, oh, no one will work anymore. There will be huge drop because we cannot see, we cannot communicate or so. Actually, there was a 55% increase in productivity. So, where you could see that remote and hybrid work can work. And people wants to have it. I know a law firm, they get a lot of young, good talent just because they're offering full remote position. And people like that idea that they can choose where they want to work from and doesn't have to live close to the office or have to commute. And therefore, this is very important. The second thing which supports this statement is if you look in the granted patents in computer technology. This data I extracted from the WIPO statistics, and as you can see, it has doubled within 10 years, which means there's this focus on. Everything becomes digitized, necessary or not. At the moment, I'm in the studies with Professor Welch, and he's also a strong advocate for the digitalization and also what the influences on IP are there. And please have a look on the IP Business Academy or his content. It's very interesting to see, and there are also some true points in it where you have to see. And now comes the conclusion to it, that all your stakeholders become digital, more available and faster. The question is, you too? For example, if you take now notes on a paper, how you access these notes 1 year later? Can you still find it? And therefore, it doesn't make sense to have to deal with intangible assets and make this your main business, and this is your focus, your profession as IP manager. But you are stuck to tangible solutions. I agree with you. The pen and paper makes sense if it's the best solution. If it's not, consider and try out the digital ones. It's always good to try to give a test. What you have to do now as an IP manager is you have to become digital ready on one hand in IP and in your work style. That just means now you have to set up your IP management also to adapt to digitalization. The way how you're accessing your files, the way do you have somewhere some files which are still on paper based, and also is it possible to enable, for example, like you had in the COVID situation, that people can work from a remote location and doesn't have to come to a certain place. I fully understand there's some confidentiality or so, where it makes sense, but still have this in mind. It's possible to do it secure. And there are a lot of service providers, solutions which offer that you can have a highly confidential exchange even from home. And sometimes, especially in medium-sized companies, sorry for saying that, the internal network, as soon as it has an internet connection, is perhaps not so safe as you believe. There's a nice article from Thomas Chamorro about the essential components of digital transformation. And he says like, hey, that's the 5 steps you have to do, that you, for example, have to review and talk to your people, understand their needs and demands and their behavior and what's important to them, to look at your data that you have already. And with data, everyone thinks about data is about, okay, it's already in computer, it's 1, 0, blah, blah, blah. That's not true. A lot of the data still today, people, some companies have in the form of paper, and also they're moving information objects based on tangible carriers like paper, like printing it on products or so. And therefore, this is all the data you have to think about if you want to go for digital transformation, the endpoint to the customers. And with that investigation, you receive some insights where you think like, okay, that's our status quo. And then you can depict where you want to go and put things into action and review the actions by the results if they're happening or not. My recommendation is this topic is not easy. Please invest in consulting. Therefore, get some professional help, especially for the user training. I know a lot of people in IP And I doubt that most of them had professional Windows training and professional Microsoft Office training. I'm sorry for that. But it's really like this. That's their main tools they're using day to day. And still, there's no professional training for them. And people just expect, yeah, they need to know, they can. The thing is, like with Excel, you can burn so much time for things that are already automated in Excel. So it makes sense to have that thing. And the other thing is like proper IT equipment. If you have an in-house counsel, usually that people have a six-figure income. Can you tell me what is the single reason why you don't offer that person a 400 euro tablet with a pen that he can access his files and take notes properly, and not only with the PC? Or to give them a second set of a monitor for his home office that he can have it properly, or a nice headset that he can work with focus. The person gets a six-figure income. Everything which raised that productivity to 1 or 2% it's way more. It has way more effect than the price for the equipment. So please have this in mind. And the next thing, I call it the essential setup for protection in a digital world. And there are two factors you have to have in mind. There will be soon invention disclosures which somehow has an AI stuff. Yeah, we need an AI and we'll control it somehow in a way. Or we have a digital business model where you need to think about, okay, how can I design my IP to protect that business model or to enable that business model? That only goes if you, and sorry for saying that, you need to have the knowledge in IP about this. What is the common practice there? What you can protect? And also, if you receive, for example, from the law firm, the first draft of a patent application, which somehow, now I say AI, the AI aspect on it, what is an enabling disclosure for this? And when it's sufficient? And if you don't know, you have to rely on your experts. It's okay to rely on experts, but it's always good to have a certain understanding. And also for you, if you understand, oh, actually, I can protect software. Because it's not only about software, it's also about the technical effect or so, which is behind. It's also hard to circumvent, and it's perhaps good to enforce or so. And therefore, you need your team of experts. Please ensure that in your law firm, there are people that natively speak IT and understand what are the specifics for claiming digital solutions and inventions. And also there's an expert already in this group, which I like to recommend. I encountered him several times, never in person, but here in LinkedIn and also other things. And I believe if you go to Bastian Best and says, hey, I come from Ricardo, he will value, appreciate, and do good service for you. Can be one person to go to. There are also other experts. Please just have this in mind in your setup from suppliers and law firms. There need be a certain level of understanding for digital inventions. Now, finally, on Wednesday comes the dream. Comes the Dream Island. But you have to know, islands belongs to Dream and not to IP management. And what does I mean with this? You have the so-called functional silos. That's a given term. People understand this. That organizations, they build like silos, and there's less communication between them. That's okay. In the IT, we have the topic island, which means, for example, IT systems which are not interconnected to other systems or so. And then you need a so-called chair interface. It's a person on a chair which puts data from one system to another system. And that happens quite often in IP because we want to be super confidential and we are introducing software which is not matching with the with the rest of the company, or we want to be very confidential. So that's the reason why we separate the data. And there are also different solutions. Another aspect is sometimes the IP department is also a bit like an island. It's so hard to interchange with other people, and people don't know what IP does. And that's different. And therefore, there are a lot of articles. Also, this one is a good one where you need to collaborate across functional silos. But this is a reality. IP management is not connected as it should be in most companies. I know some, they do it very well, and there are a lot of positive examples outside. Still, have this always in mind. Are there some boundaries, some barriers between the IP management and the rest of the organization, and how you can overcome it? And this was the internal view. There's also an external view, which is there's a nice book I can recommend, Burning the Ships. I just recently, in preparation for this talk, I was like skipping through and have this. And it's about the effect you can have with an IP strategy on your ecosystem. And it's not about the role of IP to, how can I say, prevent anyone else to do your invention or so. That's not the point. That you actually can use the IP rights to go into corporations, that you have a certain foundation where you can build on partnerships. And there's a professor in the SciP, he said a very nice sentence that I like: good fences make good neighbors. And that one is true. And therefore this book is very influential in IP management and IP strategy. I can recommend you to read it. And therefore you have to have in mind that IP is not a one-person job or a one-company topic, which means there's always this need for interconnection. There's always this demand that you can operate with other people in your organization, in your branch, and with other things. What is now important? That you ensure the interoperability within your organization and with your ecosystem. You think like, okay, Ricardo, this is a no-brainer, that sounds easy. It's actually not so easy sometimes because, for example, there are a lot of one-person departments, and it's not that the business doesn't appreciate IP or so. Sometimes there's not much more budget in it, and we have to work with the stuff that we have. So there's one good recommendation that I learned from a client, and I saw it in action. It makes totally sense. If you don't have the people, it's a bit like job sharing, that you build a network of IP ambassadors. And that can be the young engineer in a department. That can be a project leader. They can be someone. And that people, you gather them together on a regular basis. You train them in IP, and the people become very, very well aware of IP and what something can be done. And they become the go-to person in your IP department. And the nice thing for you is there's something that I learned is called trust immersion, which means people don't know you, they don't trust you. Okay, there's some sort, if the people especially have social anxiety or so, it's hard for them to contact you. Especially if you're an IP guy, sometimes we seem not so charming, I don't know. But the thing is just like, if there's this go-to person, he has the trust already of his group, and because the group trusts him, he trusts you, you earn the trust of him, and with that, people are more open to communicate and work with you. And that's a good thing. And therefore, have this in mind to build an IP ambassador network in your organization. Because if you can start even with your boss or with the CEO that says like, hey, I need four people more for IP, then he will say no. He will not do it. It's super expensive. And we come like, hey, let's build an IP ambassador network. Is somehow another solution. And with that, it's a good, perhaps a nice idea to overcome that struggle. The next thing is that I like, if you build the IP management system or you can design it somehow, ensure that you interconnect systems, data, and processes. For example, I saw it with a client, also a nice idea. He was using Microsoft Business Intelligence, BI, which you have in the most Office packages from Microsoft. And there they were sharing publicly available information about the patent portfolio and the IP rights they have by departments, and we're enriching it with internal data so that people were very informed what was the outcome of this. And that's a very good thing, and it makes IP perceivable for people, also in processes. That you interconnect, that you lower the barriers, that people can involve you in their processes. Just don't look that you don't become the bottleneck of the organization, but still it is good if there's an interconnection. And with that, you can overcome the silo effects. And the third one is what I like you to have in mind is there's something, this is also, again, something that I learned from the studies, something is called dominant design. Did you ever wonder why a car has always 4 tires? Because it makes sense. And it's a good approach. Therefore, the dominant design for cars is have 4 tires. For the moment, for smartphones, mostly is having a brick-shaped form. That's the dominant design with the camera on the back and a front camera again. Why we don't have, for example, with the screen, the main camera behind the screen or so would be also a solution. It's not the dominant design. And therefore, in your branch, at some point, products will tend to have a dominant design. And the question is, where are you? And you need to have the interoperability to adapt to the dominant design if you're not giving it. And also, due to the fact which I said earlier, everything becomes digitized, you need to be ready to work with these new forms of technology. For example, that nowadays everything tends to become a phone or at least a computer. So therefore you need to have this certain readiness to understand what you need to approach the suppliers and what they expect from you. And there's a very interesting story from Martin Schneider. Back then he was working with Audi and about standard essential patterns. There was this law that cars now have to have this emergency call button, which basically made every car a phone. And you have to understand the licensing conditions back then from a car, how they license their IP and how they pay, and how it's done for smartphones was totally different. We're ruining the business case of Volkswagen. So there was a lot of thing ongoing, and therefore can recommend that you search his name, Martin Schneider, and have a look on this story. It's very interesting. But you see there's this need to ensure interoperability. And if you are forced or so, and you have the lower position in the negotiation, it's very bad. And therefore, you have the time now to do it. Now, what is the conclusion? The conclusion is that you have to face the realities before the realities face you. And what I like you to do, I think, first of all, thank you that you were spending so much time listening to me. And now comes something you have to do for you. And that's very important. Please do it. Open your calendar, take 20 minutes somewhere this week or next week, and think about the things that you have learned today. And even if you say, no, everything is fine, I'm good, hey, good. Perhaps, but if you have one idea that changed your game, you really made my day. And therefore, I want to say thank you that have listened to me. And if you don't follow us already on LinkedIn or so, or me, please feel free to do it. And then we will start the Q&A session. So thank you very much for listening. Before I forgot, there will be a second episode next Monday from 11 to 12 Central European Standard Time. And there I will tell the next 3 IP realities. Therefore, stay tuned, because I will tell you why value is not value. It's not the same as value. And therefore, it will be an interesting discussion, I hope. So now we come to the Q&A. The first thing that I see from Bastian Best is a presentation about IP that does not involve IP. Is that even possible? Okay, I a bit involved AI, but it wasn't the main topic. Therefore, the next comment was the threaded I already know trap. I know that one, not only for the IP industry. True, totally. Then there's another person which acknowledged what Bastian said. And then there is Shu Pei-oi. I think this is really good advice. Get a second opinion, not enough check and balances on patent attorneys. Yes, that's true. Because at some point in IP, this is still a bit like the old-fashioned business. We have our strong partnership relationship. Some of the clients, they are not very well aware, and they rely totally on the expert opinion. And if the expert has a bad day, difficult. And therefore, if you have topics which are super important, double book. If you're not sure if you're experts or new experts, they are good, double book. And then you see it for the same task, perhaps different results, and you can get an idea who was the one who made the better job or so, and what you can do to involve them further. Then, which aspect from Niha, which aspect would you recommend digitizing in particular as an IP manager in an IP firm? So that's an excellent question. First of all, for me, about digitizing or so, the question is especially what is the context of your company. For example, if you things like notes, files, and information shall be already digitized. There's another thing which I strongly recommend to digitize and to use is all of us, we receive usually a lot of emails, a lot of content. You receive, for example, landscapes, you prior art, and other things. And what you can do, for example, is if you use a technology like SharePoint or so, you put everything on this OneDrive or SharePoint folder. And the next time you need to do a prior art search, you can just type into SharePoint search and it will deliver you all the documents which contain certain keywords as you have, and you can start from the internal information you already have. And that was one principle that I introduced with a customer, and they really liked it. And for them was like, oh, okay, with that we make it more accessible. So digitizing is not only about just having it tangible and intangible, but also make it accessible. Therefore, for me, because I'm a digital native, most of the stuff that I do is already digitized. What I can see, there's one issue that you have with invention, with sometimes the inventor rights declarations and so on. In some countries, they still expect that you have a written signature. So that would be the only thing where it says, okay, it makes sense to have it in one part digitized, and on the second level, you still have the paper, because to comply to that rules. Therefore, this would be the only thing where it says you can't go for digitizing there so much. And also very important is if you digitize, there's a principle in the IT which is called security by design. Your information security, what is a trade secret or not, is dependent on that, how you protect it. So you can digitize everything. That's not the point. Just ensure that only the people they shall read it can read it. And that's okay. So then we have the next question from Clio. Technology for IP strategy, management, and collaboration is paramount in this global age. Thank you. Exactly. That's correct. But there's one aspect I want to give you to think about this. Technology is one. The user adaptation, the change management is the other one. I know a lot of very good systems, and also every I have good connections to the most IP management software providers, and they have good software. The problem is usually people are, how can I say, there's a first user training or so. The change management is not professionally done, not from the service providers. Sometimes it's from the companies, and people expect they have to work, they can work with it. And we were even thinking of providing a service that I work with your systems for you, and you don't have to learn a new system, because sometimes it's a bit tricky if you're not an IT native to work with that. Therefore, the change management and enabling of the user, the motivation of the user, is more important, especially if you see that there's a certain age average age in IP departments, where people, they're above 40, 50, and for them, they have to relearn the game. And that's a different thing if you just start. And therefore, please empathize on that people are brilliant. We need to leverage on this. They can make the IP management software much better than we can do from design. So thank you for that. Then a LinkedIn user was asking, how do you motivate the inventors who prefer to contribute to open source and filing patents? That's an excellent question. Let me think about this. The question is, first of all, we need to add this in context. Make it sense to go for a patent. I know there are some companies, they prefer to file everything for a patent, but basically, what you can do with a patent is you can also contribute to open source. Or it's like, I think this is more about the digital area or so, and the question would be, what would be, you have to make a comparison of the advantages of the patent versus the contribution to open source. And if you have that feeling that the person strongly wants to go only for open source, the thing is, like, he's an employee. Basically, at least for the German soil, I can tell you, we don't own the invention anymore. If we do something or so, it belongs to if the employer claims it, it's done. The question is, does this motivate the inventor to invent more? So no. Therefore, I think it makes sense to have their good communication, keep the people updated about your strategy, what you want to do, what you want to reach with that, and how we can contribute to open source. Because at the end, if you look at the lifetime of a patent of technical inventions, they always start as trade secrets, then they become patents with a monopoly right, then they expire, then become public domain, which is another form of open source. So there's basically a life cycle. But please ask your lawyer, they know it perhaps better because they can give you the proper response to it. Why do you see a necessity still to invest in Russian region, despite the fact that Russia do not proceed anymore with enforcement from IP firms from unfriendly countries? That's an excellent question, I must say. And for me, you have to know one thing. I was a very long time a German soldier. One thing that you learned as a German soldier is really the beneficials of having an interconnected system of nations that are highly dependent in the exchange for goods and services. That was one of the ideas why we made the European Union, which shall prevent wars in the future. Now, if you think now 10, 20, 30 years, if you completely, this is my personal opinion, if you completely isolate Russia from everything, what would be their incentive to don't wage war? And therefore, I think at some point, perhaps the IP system comes back, and there can be still the fact that there's this need for filing. The other aspect that I know from a client, they had a huge patent dispute with their competitor. And it was especially for the Russian. And there they made license agreements. And at some point, for license agreements, and this, please ask your lawyer, this is now dangerous half knowledge that I have from my studies with license, is at some point there needs to be an IP asset. No matter if it's a know-how, a trade secret somehow, or the patent or trademark or something else. But it needs to have a certain, you need to have a certain asset. If there's no asset, there's nothing. How does it apply for countries where the IP is not enforced? It's a good question. And that would be, I don't know if you have a Russian-German patent attorney or so who wants to take over that topic. I would love to see it. Because this is an excellent question. For me, what I would wish in the future is that we still work with Russia. Because if Russian people work with us, also the thing with Ukraine, they're horrible. This is not the point. I don't want to get them, how can I say, that everything is super, and that's not the point. For me, it's just like, I would, in that kind, I'm also a bit the old guy. I would wish the pre-pandemic time back. Therefore, we had this interchange with people. Also, there's one potential employee that we were talking was a Russian, and there was everything hitting the pandemic, the Ukraine war or so, which makes it so difficult to hire that person, even as a brilliant person. But therefore, it will come with some time. Okay. Thank you for your comments so far. Are there any other comments? I just wait a bit because I learned that live has like 10 to 20 second delay when I see your message and when I can respond, and you see my response to it. So then I would say the Q&A is over. First of all, I want to say thank you for your time with me, and I hope you enjoyed it. For me, it was my very first time, and I was excited, and it's a very remarkable experience. So you made it for me. You made my day. Thank you a lot. Please tune in for the next episode, which will be on Monday. And if there's any questions or I can do something for you, no, or I can connect you with the proper people, let me know. I'm happy to help. Okay? I wish you an awesome Wednesday and see you soon.